This next panel discussion is co-organized with Step Up, Stop Slavery, and will address the topic of mobilization of the business and finance industries in combating modern slavery. Modern slavery is the gravest human rights violation of our time. It is a financially motivated crime generating profits of over $150 billion a year from the exploitation of over 50 million people globally. The truth is that modern slavery cannot be eradicated without the committed and active engagement of the business and finance industries. This discussion will explore the pivotal role the finance industry plays in combating slavery and trafficking and the practical steps banking institutions can take towards eradicating this crime. We have with us leading experts that will highlight why businesses are uniquely placed in protecting human rights and how they can unlock their potential, becoming key players in the fight against slavery and trafficking through their ESG agenda, human rights, due diligence and ethical business practices, and supply chain due diligence. We have the honor of having with us internationally acclaimed survivor leader Timea Nagy as an integral part of this discussion. Please welcome Valiant Richie, who will be online, OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, Daniel Thelesclaf, who will also be joining us online, Project Director at FAST Initiative, Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking, Michelle Brewer, UK Judge, Timea Nagy, CEO, founder, best-selling author, award-winning global human rights activist, survivor leader, Nikki Harilau, Manager Financial Crime and Sanctions Compliance at Bank of Cyprus. The discussion will be moderated by Katerina Stefanou, Modern Slavery Compliance Consultant and founder of Step Up, Stop Slavery. Katerina.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you very much to our amazing panel members for joining us today for this very important discussion. I'm sure lots of you, when you read the title of this panel, were thinking, what does business and finance have to do with modern slavery? The answer is everything. Human trafficking and slavery is motivated by financial gain. As we've heard in our introduction, it's a business that generates over $150 billion a year, and it's actually the second biggest business in the world after drug trafficking. The recent statistics show that today we have about 50 million people in the world who are being exploited, bought, and sold for profit. This is purely about money. Now, the conversation about the engagement of the finance and business industries is a very new one. And our panel today, we have the honor of having the leading experts in the world in this field. So firstly, I'd like to start off with Valiant Richie, OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Trafficking in Human Beings. Val, the engagement of the financial and business sector in combating human trafficking is a priority for your office. Can you please let us know why it's so important, why it's crucial, and how the financial and business sectors are connected to modern slavery? Also, tell us a bit more, please, about the work that you do in the OSCE, in the member states in this area. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this event. Good afternoon to you, and many thanks to the government of Cyprus and to Step Up, Stop Slavery for the invitation. The topic, as you have already outlined, is really timely and I think really important, so I'm delighted to see the engagement of Cyprus in the conversation, particularly given our joint work on engaging the financial sector in the anti-trafficking agenda. As you just clearly outlined, trafficking is a problem that intersects with so many different aspects of modern society and virtually every aspect or sector of our economies. And the scope and scale of it simply require intervention beyond state-led criminal justice measures. So we often think of trafficking, we say, well, this is a problem for the police. Why can't they solve it? But the fact is that the scale is much bigger than that, and the intersection with our economies means that we really need to talk to businesses. And according to the ILO, 86% of forced labor is in the private sector. So businesses have a crucial role to take action here. Now, what does action mean? Well, it means that they can strengthen their codes of conduct, they can implement due diligence measures in their supply chains, because if they put in risk management systems, then they can identify risks of exploitation, they can prevent them, and they can minimize them and eliminate them. Now, this is a fascinating time to have this conversation because there's a lot of development going on in the area of policies around this. Countries are moving, initially the policies that were being developed were sort of soft policies around voluntary measures to report on what companies were seeing. And now countries are shifting towards hard mandatory policies requiring companies to take real meaningful steps to eliminate trafficking, forced labor, modern slavery in their supply chains. These also can include criminal or civil liability provisions. So there could be serious punishments. And those laws are including remedies for survivors, victims of trafficking, to get compensation for the harm. Now, there's examples already in France, Germany, Norway, and right now the EU has just recently introduced a draft of legislation that would apply to the entire EU, which makes a lot of sense for Cyprus to be having this conversation right now. The sooner that countries talk about this issue, the sooner they're going to be able to take action on it. And we've developed, you asked about what the OSCE has done, we've developed some model guidelines for countries in legislation they can adopt, in provisions that they can adopt, in measures around labor protections that they can adopt, because this is all part of making sure that you eliminate risk. Now, the topic of this panel is not only businesses, but it's also the financial sector in particular. And the reason for that is that, as you said very accurately, trafficking is a financially motivated crime, so there's a whole number of reasons why the financial sector should be paying attention to it. And it's not just a theory. What we're seeing is increasingly businesses, banks are implicated in trafficking because traffickers misuse financial systems for their own gain and to move money. And increasingly there's scrutiny on banks, so they should be paying attention. There's a good strategic value for banks to pay attention to this. They have a reputational risk that is that they're exposed to if they don't take action, but also they can face regulatory and legal liability. So they really do need to pay attention to this topic. Additionally, there's a reason that the public sector should take action here. It helps investigators if they identify cases and improves the evidence for prosecution. It can help identify victims and contribute to their protection by seizing funds from exploiters. And it can prevent the crime by cutting off the lifeblood of trafficking. That's the reason that my office developed a paper called Following the Money. It's a compendium of resources for countries to use. It also outlines cooperation steps between the financial sector and governments, and gives red flag indicators so that countries can pay attention to and banks can pay attention to the indicators of exploitation. Now, the role of banks is really important here, and we held a roundtable with FAST, who's joining on this call, and we had several recommendations for the financial sector, and I'm going to give you those recommendations, and then I'm going to stop, but they're important, crucial points. First, one of the strongest ingredients for success on this is high-level support, political will to tackle the issue. So we need senior executives in financial institutions to engage on this. Second, we need to be proactive. Financial intelligence and financial services need to make proactive financial disclosures. They need to go out and look for indicators of misuse of their system. And we need to be proactive to eliminate those illicit flows. Third, human trafficking should be included in national risk assessments. In most OSCE states, trafficking is assessed as a low threat. As you just said, there's 50 million victims worldwide. It's one of the largest illicit crimes in the world. So clearly there's a risk. So we need to do a better job in including that in the risk assessment. Fourth, many countries only work with law enforcement or maybe civil society, but survivors of trafficking have a unique experience, and we need to incorporate their voice in anything that we do on this issue. We need to include them in our policy development and our programs and strategy development so that we can make sure that we're doing the best job possible. Fifth, we need to do training. A recent report concluded that 77% of the financial industry doesn't know how to stop proceeds connected to trafficking. And the fact is that they need capacity to do the best thing possible. Finally, we need strong cooperation and partnerships, which is exactly why conferences like this are so important, to bring together the different aspects of the community so we can build the partnerships necessary. So thanks so much for the opportunity to offer some thoughts, but I think that kickstarts the conversation in terms of this topic.
Thank you, Val. Thank you so much for that. Moving on now, we're going to hear from Timmy and Aggie. No conversation, I believe, about human trafficking can be had in a thorough way without the voice of survivors. And Timmy and Aggie is by far one of the world's leading and most impactful survivors, I would say, that we have today. She has been a victim of sex trafficking. She was sold into forced prostitution, managed to escape, rebuild her life, and now she's carrying out amazing work. Timia, can you please tell us a bit about your journey? And also, because the theme of this conference is inclusivity, if you can tell us a bit about why inclusivity is such an important factor, especially for survivors of sex trafficking. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to bring our voice to this conversation in Cyprus. I almost had the opportunity, or I did have the opportunity to do this in person and visit you guys a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. It is always such an honor to be in a company of your staff, Katerina, and your hard work, and Valen and Danielle from past. Truly an honor to bring our voice and our perspective to these very important conversations. So before I share my story, I just want to say I always get very inspired when we have these conversations, especially from such a high level officials like OSCE and FAST from the United Nations. And so it just inspires me to keep doing the work that we are doing. In terms of my story, I absolutely need to say this, but it's pretty typical. We were in a financial distress with my family in Hungary, and I accepted a job to come to Canada and work as a nanny and a babysitter, but unfortunately in a short period of time turns out that my agency was not a regular agency, it was an international human trafficking organized crime. This happened at the time when there was no laws in any country or international laws, no called it human trafficking. It was just the unfortunate employment situation, that's what they called it. Hundreds and thousands of Eastern European girls were trafficked into Canada. And many of them had to find a way out, just like myself. So that being said, the point of today's conversation is human trafficking, the economics, and the importance of reintegration. So in my personal case, it took me, because there was no laws, no support, no help, no awareness, it took me about 20 years to rebuild my life. 20 years to speak proper English, 20 years to get proper skills and education, 20 years to get to where I am today. To give you a good idea on what happens when a country actually invests and prevents or invests in victims of human trafficking and their reintegration and rehabilitation. When we started our organization 10 years after I was trafficked, I started working with victims of human trafficking. So while it took me 20 years to get proper skills and proper jobs and education and be able to actually pay my taxes eventually, victims that we worked with, it took them only less than 5 years to reintegrate. So I think we, just like Leland said, we are making incredible progress, but we have to understand one thing. Assisting victims of human trafficking is no longer just the right thing to do. We have to do this economically. We have to do this because it's the right thing to do, because people's lives are being destroyed in front of our eyes, 50 million to be exact. But we also have to do this because if we don't do this work, if we don't invite them to be a part of the countries and societies where they were ending up being trafficked and they cannot go home, if we don't do that work, based on the research that we have done in Canada, every single time you let down one victim, and you let a victim fall through the crack over and over again through a lifetime, it costs any sitting government, and take out your calculators, $785,000 per victim. My organization worked with over 400 victims. If you take out your calculator and times 400 individuals to $785,000, you do the math. So the number is so astronomical that you can't even actually get the number on a calculator. And this is what governments don't necessarily understand, or many governments, that the importance of helping victims of human trafficking or preventing or integrating is not just the right thing to do. We have to do this, otherwise the ripple effects are way worse. So in my personal journey, I can show you what happens when somebody gets reintegrated, right? So I finally got reintegrated 20 years later, and I was able to start paying my taxes. And not only that, I started a company, and I started employing other survivors. Survivors who have not had steady jobs because of their past, the gap on their resume, they didn't know how to reintegrate. We started working for our company, and we basically offered them a safe environment where we can get them job ready. So we offered them up to 2 years of employment with our company, and because of that, now they're working out in the field. One of them is a general manager, the other one is a nurse, the other one is a security guard, the other one is a video editor, and the list goes on. As a result, now they pay their rent, they buy housing, they start paying their mortgages and taxes, and now they are part of a healthy member of our society. So I think human trafficking is, and a reintegration of survivors, I think, is a very important step to the work that we are doing. And I think it's the natural next step to all the work and that has been listed already by Bill and the OSCE, all the policies, all the new laws, all the implementations that are happening around the world. So I think we are actually on an incredibly right track, and which actually goes right into the next conversation we're going to have with Daniel Telesklav, and how the financial sector is playing a part in helping reintegrating survivors. So I would like to thank very much for the organizers for us to have this conversation, or the opportunity to have this conversation, and looking forward to any questions or any other discussions we may have in our short limited time.
Thank you. Thank you, Timea, so much. And thanks for presenting that really important point that actually we don't often realize is the financial burden on the state of not implementing human trafficking legislation effectively. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Daniel Telesklav. Daniel is the project director of the FAST initiative. FAST initiative is Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking. This is quite a new initiative, as we've been saying. This is a new conversation. And this week we're celebrating the 3 years anniversary of FAST, so congratulations. Daniel, could you tell us a little bit more about FAST? I'm very, very grateful to have you with us today introducing the FAST initiative to Cyprus. Can you tell us a little bit about FAST? And also, because today we're talking about inclusivity, if you can talk a little bit into why inclusivity of vulnerable groups is so important when we're talking about preventing and reintegrating victims of human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind invitation. And it's wonderful to see dear colleagues here and fighters in our joint endeavor. So greetings from the United Nations University here in New York. In a previous life, I was the head of the anti-money laundering authorities in Liechtenstein and in Switzerland, and I was the chair of the Council of Europe's money laundering watchdog, Moneyval. And one thing I learned in that time is that financial crime and money laundering often appear as quite abstract phenomena that rarely affect citizens directly. But for the victims of modern slavery, this is the umbrella term we use for human trafficking, labor exploitation, and child labor. These offenses not only affect their financial situation, they also constitute egregious violations of their most fundamental human rights. However, what constitutes a human rights violation for us is highly profitable business for the perpetrators. It has been said before that these crimes generate a profit of over 150 billion euros per year worldwide. And this makes modern slavery the most pervasive activity of criminal organizations. Now, although these activities are illegal all over the world, the authorities have so far failed to trace, confiscate, and return even a fraction of these proceeds to their rightful owners, the survivors of these crimes. In the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, all countries have committed to ending modern slavery by 2030. Today, however, we must state that we are far from achieving this goal. Instead, the pandemic, conflicts, and climate change have further worsened the situation of those affected. And in the last 5 years, the number of victims have risen from 40 to 50 million people. This must make us very concerned. And this is why at FAST we are convinced that the current approach of combating these crimes with law enforcement resources alone is insufficient. What is needed is a much broader engagement of civil society and in particular a better cooperation with the financial sector. Now, why the financial sector? Of course, the sector cannot end slavery alone. Nor, however, will slavery end without the active engagement of the financial sector. As the world's bankers, investors, insurers, financial sector's actors have unparalleled influence over global businesses. They have a unique role to play in investing in and fostering business practices that help to end modern slavery. In short, finance is a lever by which the entire global economy can be moved. In our work, we have identified 3 connections between modern slavery and the financial sector. Firstly, as been said before, proceeds from modern slavery flow into the financial sector and are laundered there, intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or unconsciously. Second, the financial sector invests in businesses that profit from exploitation. And thirdly, financial inclusion can help prevent vulnerable people from being exploited. And let me illustrate these 3 connections with some examples from our work. In relation to the first nexus, the laundering of the proceeds of crime from modern slavery, survivors and financial experts like Timea can provide very valuable information of how perpetrators used and laundered the proceeds. This raw information is enriched with evidence from criminal cases and can be passed on to the financial sector in the form of typologies and red flag indicators. The OSCE has done great work on that and has published a compendium of red flag indicators that financial institutions can use. This leads to financial institutions being better able to identify suspicious activity and report it to the competent authorities, the financial intelligence units. In the last months, we have trained over 500 experts in Latvia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova, and are extremely impressed that as a result of these activities, of these interventions, there has been a significant increase in suspicious activity reports in those countries. Based on such financial intelligence, perpetrators can be identified and illegal assets can be seized. Regarding the second nexus, investor behavior, we support and accompany a coalition of investors jointly with an Australian organization called Walk Free in Southeast Asia so that they can better identify and mitigate the risks of modern slavery. This coalition manages over 4 trillion euros and can thus have a significant impact on the behavior of its investees. We have also worked with Walk Free and the Stock Exchange of Thailand to develop guidelines of how listed companies can better identify and address these risks. Again, stock exchanges can have quite an important role as a lever too. So let me end my intervention with an example of how financial inclusion of vulnerable groups can have a preventative effect. Our research has confirmed that vulnerable groups are better protected from being exploited when they have access to financial services. A microcredit, for example, enables the owner of a small plantation in Congo to build their own livelihood. A company founded by women in Ghana can sell its products abroad through access to payment services. Or refugees from conflict areas can support their families through a remittance channel without having to rely on the services of dubious money couriers, often linked to organized crime. During this week, you have certainly also discussed the situation in Ukraine. Well over 4 million people, most of them women and children, have had to leave their homeland, and many of them are currently living in European countries. Unfortunately, we know that this tragedy also provides a unique business opportunity for human traffickers. So making bank accounts and financial services available quickly and without bureaucracy not only enables people to build a dignified life, the bank's sophisticated IT systems can also make it possible to quickly identify suspicious transactions should people fall into dependencies. Of course, when opening bank accounts, the provision of money laundering laws must be complied with. And of course, such persons often come with a bank or a financial institution with incomplete ID documents. But we have so far been able to find solutions in all countries where we have been active that make both possible: compliance with the law and opening of bank accounts. And ladies and gentlemen, I think it cannot be that it is easier for a Russian oligarch to open a bank account than for a refugee from Ukraine. So I hope I was able to explain that there are many ways how the financial sector can engage. I just described a few of them. We are happy to continue the discussion with any of you here in the room if you're interested to learn more and work with us. But for now, many thanks for the time you have given to us, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your description of the incredible and very crucial work that FAST Initiative does. And we really look forward in Cyprus to implementing it in a more deep and integrated way. Our next speaker that we have with us is Niki Harilau. Niki Harilau is the Head of Sanctions and Compliance for the Bank of Cyprus, and she is here speaking in her capacity representing the Association of Cyprus Banks. Niki has been involved, well, Cyprus has been involved in piloting the Follow the Money project, which is a pilot project that both Val Ritchie and Daniel have referred to, which is a collaborative project between Financial Intelligence Unit, law enforcement, and banking to increase the intelligence that we're getting that we can actually use to increase our prosecutions in court cases as well. So it's a great project and it's groundbreaking, and it's fantastic that we're doing that in Cyprus. And Niki's been involved in that. Would you like to tell us
Yes,
more about this?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this event. And yes, I would like to share my experience with the project. It was very exciting. The banks were asked to identify within their clientele cases of trafficking and check the transactions that took place in the account in the past in order to identify possible red flags and typologies that could be used for the purpose of having a more structured approach to examining and investigating these cases. And as Katerina mentioned, the Financial Intelligence Unit here in Cyprus, MOCAS, was involved in the project and is in the process of issuing an operational alert, like guidance for the financial institutions with all the red flags that have been identified and the typologies, so that the financial institutions can do a better job at tracking these cases and being able to report these cases to the authorities so that the authorities have more evidence to prove criminal activity. And in this respect, the financial sector can also assist in the effort to prevent human trafficking. But what's interesting, and Daniel mentioned, is that the role of financial institutions is also to promote inclusivity. So the banks have been working towards this respect as well. We have adjusted our procedures so that we can accommodate also the more vulnerable people that need to open bank accounts. We had a lot of help from the Central Bank of Cyprus for this. They provided guidance as to alternative documents we can obtain to open bank accounts, even for people who have lost their passports in their effort to flee their country and everything. So we do try and make an effort to accommodate for these people as well and open accounts for them. And something that our bank did this year for the refugees in Ukraine, we introduced digital onboarding, and we assisted these people to open accounts here in Cyprus from their phones using their mobiles, since it was more difficult for them to access a bank in their country. And we had a lot of interest for this. So I think, yes, in general, financial institutions can play a significant role with respect to preventing trafficking. And this will continue in the future with the cooperation of the banks with the financial intelligence units and the law enforcement agencies.
Thank you, Negimo. That's that's great news. And also you were mentioning that you've been collaborating on these preventative banking measures with the central bank. Does that mean that all banks now in Cyprus are doing these preventative account opening measures, yes, like the Bank of Cyprus?
I would like to think so, yes, that everyone is making an effort.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Niki. Our final speaker in this panel is Judge Michelle Brewer. Michelle has come all the way from England to be with us today, so thank you very much for being here and for your collaboration. You're going to be talking more into business and human rights. Now, Val spoke about this quite a lot, actually. What I'm interested to hear from you is what are the consequences for businesses that violate human rights? Like, what are the legal consequences that you can tell us about? Because it's important. We know that businesses are very, maybe not knowingly, involved in a lot of labor exploitation. So what do they need to know, and why is it important for them to comply with human rights?
Great question, Katerina. Before I start, I would really like to commend the fact that we've got a global panel, because actually, as all the other speakers have intimated, human trafficking, labor exploitation is something that impacts us all globally, and it's really important that we share and collate our knowledge and build our own capacity. So that's incredibly important. The short answer to that, and maybe that's, I'm coming from the judicial side of it, but the consequences, and I'm going to be talking more about legal consequences for businesses that engage in human rights violations or somehow find themselves embroiled in human rights violations because, for instance, somewhere down their supply chain, there are businesses that are engaged in human rights violations, or their parent company and the subsidiary, wherever they are, is engaged in human rights violations. What are the consequences? Well, they're significant legal consequences. And what do I mean when we're talking about human rights violations? Well, we situate human rights violations in international law, in regional law. So for us in the UK, for you in Cyprus, of course, it will be the European Convention of Human Rights. And again, with Cyprus, it will be the EU directives. And that's where we will look to for human rights violations. And what do we see when businesses engage in human rights violations? What do these look like? Well, shortly, I'm going to walk you through some cases, legal cases, where we see those violations emerge. But generally, unfortunately, they can be throughout the spectrum of human rights violations, and the most egregious human rights violations. And by that, I mean the right to life. So you see unlawful killings of workers, forced labor, slavery, servitude, rape, other forms of sexual violence. Really, when we start looking and drilling down into these cases, sadly, we see a whole gamut of human rights violations that businesses can and have been found to be engaged in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk, because I think it's really important when we talk about legal consequences that we actually situate them in cases. So I'm going to walk you through 3 very different cases, very different business structures, and show you where we've seen that there's civil liabilities, criminal liabilities, and other forms of compensation. The first case that I want to speak to, and it's an important case, is a case called Jabir against Keek Textiles. So let me give you a little bit of an idea, background about what that case was about. On the 11th of September 2012, 258 workers in a garment factory in Karachi, Pakistan died in a fire, one of the most horrendous industrial fires that had been seen in Pakistan. And the reporting at that time on the fire made it clear that the windows in that garment factory were barred, that there was only one exit that they could leave from, all the other exits were locked. And so what that meant was the victims and the survivors were either suffocated, and then sadly for the victims, a lot of them were burned alive. So that's what was happening in this garment factory in Pakistan. So where is the business dimension here? Well, Keek was a garment, or was a retailer in Germany, incorporated in Germany. And it bought up, over several years, about 70% of the garments from that factory in Germany. But there was also another European dimension. An Italian firm, several weeks before, had been nominated as the auditor to go into the factory and check whether it's compliant with basic health and safety. And then once they were satisfied that it was, they were to issue a certificate. What emerged post-fire was that that auditing company had issued a certificate. It is believed that they hadn't even visited the premises. And what they hadn't identified on their inspection was that there was child labor present, there was forced overtime, and that, of course, that there was very deficient fire systems. So what happened as a consequence of that disaster? Well, a couple of things emerged. The first thing is that Keek very quickly offered to pay $1 million to the survivors and the victims. some of us more cynically may say that because really what we were looking at with international reporting is a significant reputational damage for those that had been named in this. But actually what later emerged, and some years later, one victim and then three family members of the victims brought a civil claim in German courts. And they did so situating it in what we would call civil liability. So they were alleging that the KIK company owed a direct duty of care, that they had been negligent to those workers in that factory. Now that case was dismissed. Now, we don't have time to discuss why it was dismissed. It's a very complex issue around private international law, but it was dismissed essentially as time barred. The courts found that it was too late. But what did happen was, because of the public pressure that litigation placed on the company, KIK, then there was a further compensation of just under 5 million euros, again, to the victims. Because, of course, what we're talking about here very much for that business was reputational harm, reputational risk. The other two cases that I'm going to talk about are two UK cases, because I think it's important when we talk about business and human rights. There's a lot of exposure, a lot of discussion, particularly globally, around multinational industries and enterprises and their engagement in potential human rights violations. And we sometimes forget about the little companies, the little businesses. And so the two cases that I'm going to talk about now in the UK, one concerns a civil case and the other a criminal case, is really very much on the lower end of the scale. The first case I'm going to talk about from the UK is Astozis and DJ Houghton. Now, that case concerned Lithuanian workers that were brought to the UK by a company called DJ Houghton. It was a small company. And they brought the workers to come and work on a chicken farm, or various chicken farms. And so what these workers did is they were sent to various chicken farms, and they were called chicken catchers, essentially. They would get the chickens and they'd upload them in the lorry. What emerged from the litigation was this, is that they had been paid very poorly, and they certainly were paid below the minimum wage. Their wages were deducted. They were penalized if they weren't working the excessive hours that they should. They were placed in accommodation that was substandard. They were malnourished. They had an enforcer, so if they felt that they were too tired to work, couldn't work, and they're working at least excessively over 13 hours a day, that enforcer would threaten them with violence. And one particular worker who just complained too much was thrown out without work and had to live in a tent, and because of hunger and destitution went back to the company asking for work again. A police officer who attended on the workers at one point described one of the workers as looking like a survivor from a prison of war camp. So the employees brought a claim against this company for unlawful deduction of wages, unpaid wages, and the like. And the courts found in their favor. The courts said that they had been unlawfully deducted wages, and damages were made, so that the company was found to be liable, and a large sum of damages was afforded to the employees. But two other important issues, I think, that are important to flag up. As I said at the beginning, it was a small company. What the civil courts did in the UK was found the directors personally liable for those damages. The second thing that the court did that I think is extremely important is they awarded what we call aggravated damages. So not only were they now going to get the payout for the salary that was owed to them, and that was a significant amount, but that was an uplift of 20% to show the aggravating features of their cases. And that was in our civil courts. And the final thing that I think is incredibly important that came out of that is that the civil judge said, I'm not in a criminal jurisdiction, I'm sitting in a civil jurisdiction. But I would say that the facts on this case that I've found as credible amounts to modern slavery criminal offences. And that's a really important outcome in the UK, and an important case for us as judges to consider. And the final case, again, focusing on the smaller cases, is a case called Khan, and that's a criminal case. So Mrs. Khan and her 2 sons and her husband operated a small restaurant in Harrogate in the UK. They predominantly secured their workers, so their waiters, their cooking staff, from Pakistan. And one of the workers described in a criminal case was brought against Mrs. Shah, her husband, and her 2 sons for conspiracy to traffic those workers into the UK. And one of the workers described his situation as this. He said he arrived into the UK, he was patted down by Mr. Shah immediately on arrival, and all of his identity documents were taken from him. He worked in excess of 13 hours a day. Although he was paid small sums that he could send back to Pakistan, he was not paid the amount that was promised, and he was certainly paid under the minimum wage. He was verbally assaulted on numerous occasions, and again placed in accommodation which was substandard, very poor quality. He was dissuaded from seeking medical attention, dental care, and generally had what the criminal court considered conditions that were akin to forced labor. And his situation was shared by 8 other employees. In the criminal court, 3 of the defendants, Mrs. Shah and her 2 sons, were found guilty of conspiracy to traffic and were sentenced to 3 years in custody. The Solicitor General, our Solicitor General, considered that that was too light, too lenient a sentence, and appealed that sentence to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal agreed, quashed those sentences, and put in place for 2 of the defendants, the 2 sons, a 4-year sentence. Last year, we issued new sentencing guidings for the Modern Slavery Act offences, and that type of case now retract a sentence likely between 8 and 12 years. So what am I trying to impress, really, with this, is that the international community, as Val has spoken about, as Daniel has spoken about, Timmy has spoken about, what the discussion is moving from is that the light touch of self-regulation of businesses, quite frankly, is no longer going to wash. And actually, we are moving now to accountability for human rights violations committed by businesses. There was a recent Canadian Supreme Court which said that customary international norms that are breached, you can bring causes of action not just against states, but directly against businesses. And so that's really showing the trajectory now of the narrative. And certainly we are seeing emerging in the UK, particularly supply chain cases that are being brought, that they are settling because businesses recognize the significant reputational risk that is coming from these cases when they are litigated. So I'm perhaps the stick in this conversation, and you have more of the carrot in seeking on the frameworks that should be adopted by the financial services industry and the businesses. And the final thing I would say is that the last case I had in practice before my appointment was one that wasn't a supply chain, it was about international financial investors. And we were moving to name and shame those investors in an application to the Special Rapporteur dealing with trafficking on women and children, because they were investing in companies that were directly engaged in human rights violations. And so that was something that I had been working on before my appointment as a judge. I do not think that that is a lone case, and certainly international advocacy beyond just domestic courts and international courts is something that we're going to see emerging over time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that. It's very, very positive that such great steps are being taken by the courts regarding business and human rights. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it develops, because both the areas dealing with finance and business are very new ones, which is a great sign that we're on this path. In conclusion, I'd like to actually pick up on the words that Daniel said, which is that the finance and business industries can't end slavery alone, because the fact is that slavery and trafficking affects every single industry, every part of society, and every single one of us personally. Every one of us has to understand and play our role in ending human slavery and trafficking. But the truth of the matter is that without the active engagement of finance and business, human slavery will never end. So thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you, Cyprus Forum, for having us. And thank you to our audience for giving us your time and your attention on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you.